And we're live, I believe. Fingers crossed.
It says setting up. You're there.
Awesome. Well, thanks everybody for joining us, and welcome to another episode of the SOPP, Southern Oregon Progressive Podcast. I'm Kevin Bell, as always. The one and the only Betsy Cunningham is my co-host, the brains and muscle behind this. And as always, we've got a full house today, dude. It's good to see everybody again. Um, we're just gonna go down the line from what I see, and if you guys want to introduce yourself a little bit, please go ahead. The first one on my right is community rights, which would be John Hunter.
Yeah, yeah, I'm John Hunter, president of Community Rights Douglas County. So, and I've been attending this for about a month now.
Well, I love having you, John. You're really good and smart, and
Well, I don't good. I don't know if I'm good. I don't know if I'm smart.
then Jamie Sanchez, right? Right, it's Jamie. Oh, you're
Get
muted.
my thing to unmute. Sorry, sorry. The well, as you know, my name is Jamie Sanchez. A little bit of my background. I actually have a master's degree in social work, but I concentrated in macro practice, which means that it's the community development policy analyst side of things. Most people associate social workers with the mental health side. There are actually other kinds of social workers out there. and I spent like 4 years on our housing authority board. I worked with residents like with HACO, because I myself am on Section 8, and we worked as resident group. I also have worked in other advocacy roles, and also right now for Housing First Umpqua, I'm contracting with them we're doing some analysis and some policy development, some response to some of the things that are going on locally that maybe haven't had the voice that they've needed to really be more in the public eye.
Awesome, thank you, and honestly, thank you for the work Housing First Umpqua does. I've also done my fair of activism with them, and it's a very good cause. Very good cause, in my opinion. It all starts at the house. Octavia, please, would you? You're next.
My name's Octavia Sanchez, and some of my background is that I received a bachelor's degree in interdisciplinary studies from Eastern Oregon University. What that means is that I have my degree is multiple disciplines instead of just a major and a minor. So minor is psychology, sociology, and anthropology. And some of what I've done is I've aided Betsy Cunningham when she's had me been involved with some of her political work. I'm more involved now because of the projects of Housing for Soundcore. But in the past, I've done things like volunteer at the Winston Library.
Well, thank you for coming on. I used to work at a library, and I know how droll it can get, even though reading's half the point.
Yeah.
Zach, you're next on my line.
Sure. I'm Zach Whitworth, historian in training by practice. Born and raised in Roseburg, Oregon. Lived in Oregon for most of my life. And this year I've been involved with Community Rights Douglas County with John. And otherwise, I'm affiliated with the Institute for Social Ecology in Vermont. Nice to be here.
Heck yeah. Thanks for joining us, Zach. And also, I've been hearing about Fir Grove a lot, so I'm glad for an update farther in on the episode.
Definitely.
And Jaden, it's good to see you, kid. How are you doing? You're up next.
Hi. I'm doing all right. I'm an activist, and I've been dealing with uh, chronic housing insecurity and homelessness for most of my adult life. I'm disabled and recently finally got diagnosed with being on the autistic spectrum. amongst other things. So yeah, I am firsthand experience in being an oppressed individual within our society. Yeah.
Honestly, that leads for, I know the first thing we're going to talk about is Betsy's going to take it from here, and then we're going to talk about the executive order. But I honestly think that's a really, really great question to really start off with this audience and take like kind of a generalized poll. Raise your hand digitally or in the video if you yourself in Douglas County have dealt with like some severe housing instability. If you've worried about where your next meal is going to come, where I think it's really important because like I think a lot of people don't realize how unstable the ground is in Douglas County. You know what I mean? My family survived off food boxes for sure. Betsy, but it is off to you. You're muted.
Yeah, I'm playing around with the screen, and so raising my hand in the last segment, I too went even with kids, but it's been more short-lived, although it's been more than once, and and it's very challenging even when you have resources, which we did when that happened, and so it ended up being short-lived. We solved it ourselves, and it is not something that's probably more indicative of for what years was really the majority of folks who ended up homelessness. They often were literally on the street. But it's all around that income versus housing, problem, that happens. So one of the things that Housing First Umpqua is in the process of revitalizing itself, and Jamie being the policy wonk, we asked her to take a look at a couple of things, and lo and behold, in the middle of looking at some of the stuff that has been promised to Douglas County and Roseburg, we have the big, beautiful bill, which impacts housing and homeless services and a variety of other things that impact folks living on the street. And Jamie was kind of delving into that stuff, and then the executive order, although it wasn't totally unanticipated, but decided it's one thing that scares people and it would be a good thing that we take a look at it. So what actually Jamie and Octavia and I did a week ago, got online and kind of went through it. The one thing I'm going to preface it is that it is not as scary as people think, right? And even I see a lot of stuff in the homeless community and I think we'll just kind of go through it the way we did the other day, and kind of talk about the highlights of it. It's really not that long. The bill itself is not that long, the executive order. And you'll see that it's really a bunch of bullshit. I mean, really, it's just created to make the base, feel good about always going to do something, wipe all the immigrants off the street, and now he's wiping, gonna wipe all the homeless off the street, which is really not possible, but it's also really nonsensical when you go into really what they're claiming that they might be able to do what the law and funding allows. Right? Isn't that what we got from it? So it really is just such a waste of energy. So, how, Jamie, you want to take it off, and I will share the from the White House itself. It's very exciting.
I would start by just even talking about what the executive order is titled, right? Any crime and disorder on American streets. Those are buzzwords. Those to me are words that you end up using to make people afraid or make people feel like they need to be afraid of something if you, if something that this executive order claims to do doesn't happen. And so I think that playing on people's fears is probably why people are so scared of this bill, because the name alone indicates that there's something to be scared of. And so and he used in the executive order, the first part uses one endemic vagrancy. I still am very confused by what that is. And so they start using, like, they pulled out the dictionary of buzz terms to kind of you know to kind of make you afraid. But you will find if you read the bill or the order, as you go through it, it says a whole lot of nothing for the most part. I mean, one of the big things is about forced commitment, right? They want to for mental health issues and how they do civil commitments. Well, most states, including Oregon, already have a process for civil commitments. So people will think, oh, they can just go lock up homeless people. Not really. I mean, there's still the issue that no matter what they have all of us have due process rights, or at least we should in practice. And so when you look at that, you see things, you think they're just going to round people up and, lock them away and say they're all mentally ill. But that that again is just something they want you to. I think this is really playing to the MAGA base in the sense that it is in the sense that it says a lot of things that they are probably, you know, uh, I the way I read it is that it's just very much like, like to talk about like drug abuse, and they talk about and they talk about mental health issues, and and they it talks a lot about things that are already been on the table for years, involving um, it's a societal problem. The real problem is that they want to treat housing and homelessness as a crime instead of societal issue that all of us who believe in any amount of social justice should be addressing or trying to already. And we know that criminalization of homelessness, addiction, mental health issues, none of that works. We've tried it. It didn't work before, and there's no reason to believe it will work now. Do one of you two want to jump in?
One of the things I noticed about the language of this bill is that it's very repetitive. I didn't find it to, I like on a similar vein to what you said, I didn't find it to be of much substance. And a lot of it is the same rhetoric based in, neoliberalism about, oh, this personal responsibility narrative that has led to these bad policies. And to me it just reads like the MAGA people are gonna love that because it's frankly all it's like confirmation bias for them and their existing ignorant beliefs about the world.
What I noticed is when we were looking at it, they referred to the number of people, and they used a study that was done in San Francisco earlier this year, where it indicated that 67% of people living on the streets had used hard drugs. But what that doesn't qualify in this is in their lifetime. It doesn't make it clear, and that it doesn't also even indicate even say that I think it was like 36% has said they had used it in the last 6 months. So it's taking this data and trying to say, oh, look at right now, there's all these people who are using meth, which they said was that study indicated meth was the primary drug, and then fentanyl or other types of opioids. But so they're like everything that you see coming out of this administration. Facts don't seem to matter. They're kind of cherry picking out details that may be true, that the study they did had 67% of the people on the street saying that they had used some hard drugs sometime in their lifetime. Not that but only 36% said they had used any of this within the last 6 months. So that's very, different data to be looking at. And so there's a lot of emphasis on the illegal drug use. And then the restoring the civil commitment. For one, I could not find, because this was my recollection, there's no procedure of federal civil commitment for mental health issues or anything else. And so, in the context of certain criminal behavior on a federal level, you can be a predatory sex offender if you are charged with some federal crimes regarding that and actually kind of like suffer a civil consequence of incarceration. In the federal level, if you are found to be incapable of participating in your own defense, or that you committed a crime because you were mentally ill, those things you can be incarcerated, if you will, or locked up. But for their, one is until you can help yourself in the defense. The other is if you're actually committed and you find some improvement. So it's really not the same thing. So you can't restore civil commitment at a federal level. So this number two section is just, that title is just again a misstatement of what can happen. And Oregon, like most other states, I don't know of a state that doesn't, has their own civil commitment procedure. It's on some standard that's not universal of, you know, whether you're a threat to yourself or others. Um, that kind of thing can happen. It is very high bar to get somebody committed in Oregon. It is sometimes troubling when I have run into people on the street that really are at a danger, that it's really hard to get the state of Oregon to intervene and take them off the street and deal with them. We don't have any really good solutions for that. But there is a process in Oregon in which to do that. And maybe there needs to be a dialogue of, what that actually means. And I think the research I did indicates that there's really a big difference between what one state or another may consider a risk to oneself or to others. So that may be one of the problems that we see. And what I'm seeing is not people who are harming others, but I have seen people that are putting their lives, have put their limbs literally at risk, who now no longer have limbs because there was no means in which to force them into medical treatment when they were living on the street. So I think that may be a social dialogue we need to have.
Well, in
And
my opinion, this is all just it nips the flower of the weed that's growing in your yard and doesn't really yank it by the roots. Because if you ask anybody of like my generation, the war on drugs was a complete and utter failure. Drugs won. You know what I mean? That's why our friends are still dying of fentanyl at an unprecedented rate and stuff like that. Drugs have won right now. This is just hyperbole, saber rattling for the base. And you're entirely right. Civil commitment and all this forcing people to do stuff is entirely the wrong way to look at stuff. And if anything, it's more of a waste on taxpayers' money than anything, because it does not cause the simple root cause of everything on this is it could. I'm not going to say that it's all connected to one thing, but I'm saying that a good solution, an easy solution to this, is housing. You know what I mean? And just foremost and just housing. Putting someone in some sort of housing, apartment, someplace warm to sleep at night. Because, like you're saying, a lot of people are losing limbs. They're losing their lives because, I mean, here in Douglas County, it's a pain to open a warming or a cooling shelter on any extreme, depending on the seasonal difference. So it's just like, what is the problem here? Because a lot of these people are using drugs because they're trying to escape their harsh reality, which is freezing temperatures or burning hot pavement. You know what I mean? And a lot of these people aren't necessarily using drugs for their enjoyment as much as a medicated relief, because maybe sometimes they're actually have gangrenous. What was it? I had a friend named Angel. Do you remember Angel, Betsy, that used to go around all the time? And he had gangrene on him. And for a while, no doctor would see him. Especially in Douglas County, we have a major brain drain. All of our young people, all of our doctors are either hugely unqualified because they come from inexperienced medical schools, or just coming to finish out their credits and ready to go on to their next place where they can make buku bucks. Or there's no sense of commitment here in Douglas County. So when nobody really wanted to treat Angel for quite a long time, so his only remedy was self-medication. It's just the simple fact of the matter, and what we can do is try and find solutions to our housing crisis. There's other options out there. I mean, I've been doing some other studies. What was it? I was reading on the Seattle Times because I recently went up to visited my cousin last weekend. Not last weekend, a couple weekends ago. And, they were trying to figure out, they were going to get rid of a lot of like the downtown parking areas that are just like the last of the parking lots there, and they're going to try and figure out some way to put that into housing. You know what I mean? They haven't. What I read was a lot of, again, the opposite hyperbole. You know what I mean? Another sable rattling, but from the liberals. You know, oh, we're gonna find a way to do this no matter what, blah blah blah. But they didn't actually give any concrete plans. You know what I mean? I think it's a great idea, something that can be expanded upon, and just like you're talking about, it's this social conversation what we need to have. Where frankly, we need to realize that the more money we're spending to fight this stuff is the real. We already lost, dude. We're gonna keep seeing deaths no matter what we do. The only way to actually see a marked, maybe even save the taxpayer some money is to put them in housing.
Well, one of the other things I want to get away from is conflating homelessness with addiction and mental health issues. Okay, because that's why it allows us to steer this discussion into addiction issues. But one of the things, even when you look through this order, it seeks to, in appropriate cases, they want to overturn precedents in court cases. You know, that had a lot to do with your due process that Jamie was talking about. So they're looking at, are they going to attack due process in order to commit somebody without sufficient due process? I mean, and that's always like the civil liberties debate about involuntary commitment, right? You know, it's the government, and what standard is the government going to use to say that you're crazy and you need to go, be locked up? It could certainly be political dissent and has been used. Political dissent has been attacked in that manner at other periods of time. But they also talk about the ability to use money they have, and I would argue that the reason that we don't have is not just the housing, but Rat Park is the experiment about, instead of personal moral failure, addiction being based on personal moral failure, it's really social moral failure. When we don't have a society that has, housing for all, those kinds of things might really be the key as to why so many people get addicted to all kinds of substances. And I also don't want to lose track of the fact that most addicts, even under the what is it, the
DSM
DSM
5.
five,
It's the 5, the DSM 5.
Yeah.
yeah, the diagnostic manual for, mental health issues is, most of the addictions that they talk about are people who have houses. Okay. I mean, the reality is the majority of people who are addicts are people who are sheltered. So it's a much more, the issue of addiction needs to be looked at in why are so many people in our society addicted. And certainly I could see why you would be, you know, uh, hardcore addicted if you had to live on the street, because even the data of that report out of San Francisco indicated that some people actually started the use of these hard drugs after landing on the street and not being able to get off.
Well,
And
and I
so,
think it's important when you talk about housing and even addiction to point out, I mean, all of us know the famous example of like Keith Richards from the Rolling Stones, and how for years and years and decades, even, he was a heroin addict. He wasn't homeless because he had the means to not be homeless. So it wasn't addiction alone that makes people homeless. There's also, we are vilifying the lack of resources that are available to most of us in our communities. We are not just even with mental health issues. We see rich people who are, you know, they have 4 mansions and they need and they need mental health interventions, So this isn't really a thing about either of those issues when you consider in regard to housing. It's an issue of lack of resources, income, whatever way you want to look at it. But I do want to go back for just a second here. We're talking about you're talking about the 2/3 of people with, drug use and mental health issues and stuff. From what I understand, this is based out of some of these numbers are based out of a Harvard study, Stanford study that was like 3,000 plus people. I can't remember the exact number. And so these people are homeless, and they compiled these answers, but in the same breath, even this executive order says that in 2024, well, they don't say that, but that's what they mean. um there was the point in time count showed that there were 222 people that were sleeping on the streets that day in January, the point of time count. Now, if that number is true, we have to think that this 3,000 number isn't even a representative sample of what's going on in the homeless community. I mean, most people do not consider almost nothing a representative sample. So they preach that as though it somehow says aha about people, but really, when you have that many homeless people and that small of a sample, to me, it doesn't really say a whole lot other than maybe a starting point for future studies.
Well, it's also this when it comes to drug addiction, people, you have to always say this because people don't understand that correlation does not equal causation. Is it true that a lot of homeless people are alcoholics, addicted to drugs, whatever it is? Yes. But that doesn't mean that was the first thing and then homelessness followed. And I think a lot of people want to believe that that's the case because it's a way of basically get out of jail free about thinking about things more critically.
Oh, you can
Well,
see
they
this
have the
go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, when they put applicable and things like that, those are get out of jail free cards because it basically leaves them an out. So when none of this stuff works, they can say it was because the law needs to be changed or the local or the the people, the boots on the ground weren't doing what they're supposed to be doing. It's it's all a way for if this doesn't work out the way they want it to, they have an out.
Yeah, and then like the section 3 is fighting vagrancy on American streets, and this is looking at enforcing prohibitions on open illegal drug use. I don't know, we had this discussion. We don't really see hardcore open drug use as people living in Douglas County as being a major issue. That may certainly be in other places, but I think they are enforced. If cops see this happening, they're going to enforce it here. Enforce prohibitions on urban camping and loitering. We don't have anti-loitering laws, and I think this is one of the things. I think it was the U.S. Supreme Court many years ago that kind of outlawed most loitering or even asking for money, prohibitions against people. So that would, need to change the law in order to even try to enforce it. Not that that can't happen. And then on urban squatting, and I'm not particularly, I think we were all puzzled about what actual urban squatting is in the context. Is it any different than what they're calling urban camping or loitering? And so we're not quite sure. But one of the things that they look at is things of saying, well, we're going to be able to get these people into treatment facilities, outpatient, or by moving them into in treatment centers or their appropriate facilities, via civil commitment. Well, they don't have the resources to do that now without civil commitment. And so, this is the big joke to us that, in all the years that I've even been doing it more recently, outreach since 2013 in Roseburg, numerous times. Me and Martha, who was in housing first until she passed away a few weeks ago. Here she was, taking people to adapt when she lived here. She was and trying to facilitate. And when people say they wanted help, that was a big thing that she did in Douglas County. We couldn't get people into treatment. Or by the time that they say, okay, well, you can sign up, and by, people that want it right then, you need to be able to provide it right then. So this whole idea that somehow we're going to miraculously take away the money from the billionaires in the big beautiful bill and now fund, mental health treatment, now fund addiction treatment, and all of those have acknowledged over the years that people need the stability of housing, right, to
Well, and it's
effectively
pointing
manage
out
mental health issues.
and it's worth pointing out that we defunded a lot of that institutionalized mental health programs because not only did Republicans or wanted to save money when that happened, but it was also this idea that we were going to bring our people who needed mental health interventions into our communities, and our communities were going to take care of them. They were going to give them the support they needed to have more successful outcomes for their life, or whatever their goals were. But we never funded it. That's the problem. And now we're saying, okay, that doesn't work, but we never ever invested the resources, the money, the interventions that would have been needed to even give that model a chance to succeed. I mean, it's really like, okay, let's lock them all back up, but we never truly knew if the community based models would have worked.
Well, and you're absolutely right. In the 80s, when I was doing homeless organizing in Long Beach, they actually did have housing first. And I know it's credited from being on the East Coast, but it wasn't necessarily called housing first. But it was after the deinstitutionalize of people in California where I lived, under right reasons, right? Because we did just warehouse and throw away the key, if you will, for people with persistent and severe and persistent mental illness. It's very, very inhumane. And it was all about, you're absolutely right. The whole thing was we're going to put them in the community, have them live and integrate into the community, which is the proper thing to do. And then we're going to have all these integrated services then. So the fact that we're talking about integrated services now is just laughable to me, because 40 years ago, they
Oh, you cut out again, Betsy.
Yeah, I think that she said she's having a problem like with their internet box. I thought she got it resolved, but apparently not. The
like permanent basis, and that was never funded. So, and it wasn't funded sufficiently to make sure that people would not end up homeless. And when the model formally Housing First Umpqua, they started putting in little pockets extensive money resources into making sure that would not happen. Where that has been implemented and funded, it is successful, and it is successful in helping people manage their mental health issues. Unfortunately, many of the things that we've done in the last 40 years have not been appropriately funded, and we let people not only fall through the crack, but become victimized by actually ending up in the penal system, because they're mentally ill. And actually, I find that just extremely offensive that they do that, but that is what we do.
And
well,
and that's, in my opinion, one of the, no, this is getting off of topic, but this is also getting into philosophy, which also gets back to, that's kind of the problem with the American promise of compromise. That's always, the beautiful, oh, we can always find a middle ground. But honestly, that honestly is a way recessive, because frankly, when we have a service that works, but we only fund it halfway, nobody really wants to say it works, and then nobody wants to try it out again until it's too late, and it's just because it was not properly implemented the first time, and that's why people believe, Democrats with 3 chambers of Congress couldn't put in a crosswalk, but Republicans can scrap constitutional authority. But I mean, and I guess that kind of just goes into the argument of, Democrats are trying to find this middle ground too much, in my opinion. What are they trying to die on their hill for at this moment?
Well,
It's
the thing also happened in housing, right? That over the last 4 decades, because of the privatization of our public housing services led by Ronald Reagan, that that we have a net loss of affordable housing. And Octavia, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
I was gonna say the other problem with the what getting going off of what Kevin Bell was saying is that the middle ground. It's funny because middle ground is like literally a logical fallacy in philosophy, and what's happened is that the Republicans have figured out that the Democrats slash neoliberals are more interested in appearances than they are in substance, and it's gone to the point where the Republicans are not even pretending like they're going to be meeting the Democrats halfway on anything. And so for me the analogy is more like the Democrats are are playing basketball, and the Republicans are playing football. I choose football because it's more of a brute force sport, much like the way that they enact policies. They just plow through people that are obsessed with formalities.
Um, you know, it's just it's all very sad because after you read this executive order, or at least come to fundamentally have some understanding of it, a lot of the language in here is contradicted in the big beautiful bill. Like for services and things that they're cutting off to people of limited to no means. And now they're saying you need to do all this, but we're taking but we're going to put more of you on the street due to these, these funding cuts, all this budget stuff. But now we need to get you back off the street. I guess to me there's a fundamental disconnect between those two ideas.
Huge. It actually is huge because they're not, if they actually just funded the stuff that we have in many instances, and we're able to train enough, the other side of your master's degree, mental health workers, but
Mhm.
housing, just producing the housing alone could help stabilize many people, whether they're addicted, have persistent and severe mental illness, or a combination of both. I mean, it would help stabilize them enough to even make some of these things about mental health. And to me, it's ironic you won't pay for a house. A tiny house is probably cheaper than paying for a bed in a mental hospital, right? So you won't buy get them a small house to live in and provide support services, but now you're going to pay for all this incarceration because that is when the bill, I mean, even the navigation center locally, just having places for homeless, the big operating costs are personnel services, not the actual structure and and the place that actually houses the folks.
Well, and
So
then you'll also, have to speak in just general, like both Octavia and Betsy know that well, Octavia lives with me, but that I rent from UCAN. I have lived in the apartment that I rent for 21 years now. I live in one of their very few transitional housing where they want you to be addicted or whatever. It's like my 6 unit complex might be the only one they own like that. And I bring that up because it's even accountability within these agencies for what funding they're gonna have moving forward. Because I live in a 6 unit complex, and it's like they call it like three attached um duplexes or whatever because but anyways, the unit next door to mine, we the last people who lived there had to move out before you can evicted them. That was the agreement they made. This two-bedroom apartment, which is really nice and huge, mine is, and this is a semi mirror, a year. We are going on a year that this place has been vacant. I have never even seen them invite anybody over to look at the place's potential renters. I mean, while it's nice for, peace and quiet, it's kind of like to me, who is this kind of agency that is not being held to account when we have people on the streets and your turnover rate is a year?
The apartment, what my Jamie's saying, my mother, apartment next door is so neglected that there's still a busted Ethernet cable connection in the living room, and the backyard and the door are covered in cobwebs and different types of debris, because the last time we saw somebody over there doing anything was probably months ago now.
So we're talking
Yep.
about a vacant union that could house a family, a
Yep.
Yes.
two-bedroom unit, and that's
Yes.
Yep.
just one of them. And if they're not paying attention, so I do think that sometimes I might tend to agree with people suspect that sometimes government money is wasted. I would think that
Yeah.
this is a clear example of waste. But you also don't throw out those programs and say the programs are failures when really accountability and who's actually making them accountable for what's
Well, that's what I
happening. And
mean.
usually
I
that
mean,
stuff is data driven. So there's, kind of a puzzler to me that I remember when you were on the Housing Authority Board, the Housing Authority under HUD rules had only so many months that they had to release or lease up is I guess the term they use
Mhm.
there, before the Housing Authority would be penalized and money would be taken away in
I was gonna
administrative
say,
fees.
don't they get like bonuses for how quickly they get that stuff done? I mean, I thought that, like it incentivizes them to do that, and make sure those places are not vacant for too long.
Right. And I'm not sure if it's a bonus or if it's a penalty. I can't remember exactly, but
Mm.
I knew that after that they had only so much time HUD gave them to release those properties, which means do all the maintenance, the cleanup, all that, and if they didn't, they would then lose money. The housing authority would lose money in the administrative fees in the way that on those particularly the project-based or regular public housing stuff. So, there's a way to keep people accountable, and there's really not much. And a lot of this stuff that when you look through here, they say in support of housing first policies that deprioritize accountability and fail to promote treatment, recovery, and self-sufficiency. The reality is that housing first does not deprioritize accountability. It actually just recognizes that when you're housed, what the accountability should be when the government runs your housing, particularly, is maybe it's the way you behave, right? Your accountability is you're a good neighbor, right? So the accountability of any standards that we have ever promoted is to ensure that people are not violent or a harm to other people, even in what we promote as temporary safe ground. The rules are you don't steal and you don't hurt people, right? That it's a safety issue. So it's what they want is they want you to do what they think you should be doing to fix yourself, not necessarily house yourself and access services that may benefit you. And so I think that they're trying to also demonize the term housing first as some boogeyman that has exacerbated the cause of homelessness. But the main model is housing ready, which has always been in place for the last, since I got involved in homeless issues in the 80s in LA. It's fix you first. Okay. You're going to go into temporary shelters and then you're going to have to do XYZ before you get a real home. Right. That model has failed, yet this executive order seems to want to, continue that model and really isn't going to do anything to help with homelessness. Also, I'd assume the big thing that you're going to find that there are advocacy organizations nationwide that deal with homelessness issues specifically and have lawyers, and there's going to be lawsuits about this stuff when they try to implement any of it. So I think that we may see cities attempt to implement things that they think this justifies, but in reading through this numerous times, I just don't see how it's going to fly for any of them. And already I did see a story last week about Eugene. They were interviewed, a news story about this, and the city of Eugene said, we're not going to do anything different. We have a state law, and we do, right, have a state law, time and place, and what governs the ability to do sweeps, for one. And so based on the state law, they don't see that this executive order really changes anything, and I tend to agree with them. So
Well,
anybody,
and you
go ahead.
also in this executive order, they speak on the issue like of sex offenders. Of course, that's a huge buzz, term, and how have to keep they need to be tracked, and but most states, including Oregon, already have a sex offender registry and are already supposed to be tracking these, or it's already supposed to be tracking those individuals that are considered like sexual predators and unsafe in their communities. So a lot of this language I find is very redundant to stuff that already exists.
Right.
Yeah, because it's
That's
Megan's law. It's Megan's law. It's like this is a well-known, ongoing thing.
yeah.
So you don't need to repeat the language of Megan's law to make your base feel better.
Well, and for all of these things that they want to improve on, I don't necessarily disagree that mental health services need to be better. Substance abuse treatment needs to be better. But that's going to be funding and making sure there's enough providers. Because even if you had money and jobs here, let's say in Douglas County, you still may not have providers. So I don't think this really fixes much of anything. It just makes, people feel good who, want to believe, oh, this is something wonderful and new. It's really not. Um, Anybody else have comments or questions, thoughts? Anything else, Octavia, Jamie?
I do want to just 1 minute touch on, I mean, I know there's way more to this than that, but um, that they have on here the language that talks about here, let me see exactly where I'm at, is where it talks about that unless you have a place to go to and a plan, they're not supposed to release you until you have a plan to remember. I'm trying to find the exact language it used, but it it does talk about how people in jail and stuff need to have a plan of where they're going to go before they release them. That has
Mhm.
legalities screaming left and right. You can't, what are they going to do, keep people past their sentence time without any due process because they don't have a house? I mean, I'm not clear what they think that's what they're going to do with that.
Well, they currently have some of that, exit the jail planning, particularly, for people on parole. But even then, they don't necessarily guarantee they're housed and they still are let out. Right. So
Right.
I don't know. Can they involuntarily keep you because they can't find you housing? That
Right.
would be an
That's
interesting
it's
legal
I think it's
issue.
going to be a legal problem. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the custody housing release plans. And see, and it says it's one of those qualifiers to the maximum extent practical require individuals to comply. So if they can't comply, you say, okay, well, never mind. So,
Exactly.
that's why it's a bunch of nonsense. So, any comments? Jaden, are you still with us?
Yeah. Um, I'm just trying to reflect. I guess, it's definitely important to keep up with, what's going on with the Trump administration and these bills and executive orders, targeting groups of people like homeless people. But, and I know, I think it was touched on a little earlier. It's just, as an activist, I see like the Goliathan level battle, beast that is the establishment of the status quo of politics, um and how that's, everyone talks about this divide of how the Republicans and the Democrats can't work together. I don't believe that narrative, that they work together just fine when it comes to maintaining power. And so for in terms of housing, both of them believe that housing should be a commodity, and that's a problem. And that, in my opinion, it creates uh all the issues that we're having with housing now, because housing is inaccessible for most people under the age of 50. Like, how many people can make six figures? You have to make more than six figures in order to afford a home at this point. And so most people are being pushed into renting, if they even can get to that point. I can't, I'm struggling to have ever been able to make it to that point, even as a rentor, because, a bare minimum for a room is going to be like $750 a month. Which, if anyone's on disability, I think that's $800 a month. So, it's the I'm very frustrated with politics because the Democrats are just as much a problem, in my personal opinion, as the Republicans. The establishment Democrats don't think they have to change. They don't. All they have to do is let Trump win, and Trump messes everything up. And then when everyone starts getting desperate, they'll vote for the Democrats, and the Democrats never have to change a thing. And that's why they undermine people like Zura Mamdani in New York City. They don't have to embrace him because the system is just going to keep bouncing us back and forth between the establishment of the Democrats and the Republicans. And who are the victims? The people like me and people like my friends who are homeless and poor. It's just we live in a state where we have the governorship, the the Senate and the House of Representatives, or the representatives, and we just now this year was minimum wage raised to $15 an hour, and somehow they pat themselves on the back as if that's some accomplishment. It should be $25 to $30 an hour minimum now. But that's a pipe, to them that's a pipe dream. And so I hope one day that we can come together with people who are Trumpers, because they are going to be affected by this as well. And I'm going to keep saying it, and I've been saying it for a very long time, that we are like, I do not see, like, I accept that the Republicans are terrible people. I'm tired of pretending that Democrats are any better. And until we call out people like Tina Kotek and the entire Democratic establishment for their failures to address any of the issues, nothing's ever going to change, and homelessness is going to continue because it's all about profit, capital, and power. That's all it's about. Anyway, that's my two cents.
You're
You're
right,
absolutely
Jaden.
right. You're absolutely right on everything you say. And the housing as a commodity issue is the major problem. We never should allow people to get rich off of basic human needs. I mean, it's just terrible. And you're absolutely right. I mean, for me, I have not voted Democrat or Republican in a presidential election in years because I hate both parties. I just gotta be
Oh,
honest. And they're both morally bankrupt, and they're not afraid to use us as pawns in, destroying our climate, starting wars, getting richer. And when you're that greedy, it's never going to be enough, no matter how much they get thrown at them.
Oh, well, I've actually, I've seen landlords, complain about whatever their petty issue is at the moment. And I've actually dropped sometimes I just drop the facade of I'm listening to it, and sometimes I have gotten to the point where I've straight up have said to landlords, being a landlord's not a job, you're a parasite. You're collecting other people's money while you sit on your ass. It's not a job. And it's like, but you're not being nice. I'm just like, I'm not interested in being nice to people who cause so much suffering.
Yeah, I mean that's you're the whole thing about the policy issues and the neoliberal and the march towards a reduction in housing alone. That's all about privatization, right? Our public housing system really should be in the public sphere. They're the ones who should develop it. They're the ones who should run it because there's accountability there. That our common housing for people should in fact be run by the commons, not by a private enterprise. But it was both the Republicans and the Democrats who voted for the low income tax credit. And Jamie, you and I, when Progressive Oregon was doing podcasts, we did a whole thing about when they wanted to change the laws in Oregon to allow more people to loan. And it's basically a tax credit to get people who make capital investments for a living to make themselves profits, actually are the ones who are funding our now public housing system and have been the primary funder since the 80s when Reagan started rolling out the low income tax credit. And Western Regional Advocacy Project, we at some point in the near future is going to have Paul Bowden come on the show and talk about the status of it. But they're the ones that really piqued my interest when they did Without Housing. They did an analysis. It went from the 70s to 2010, and you don't really have to update, the history, right? The history is still the history, and shown how we have this march towards a reduction in affordable housing availability, as not surprisingly, how homelessness started to go up and up and up, and so those things may not be the causation, but I'm going to bet, Octavia, that they're more likely the causation. One, is the causation of the other to that degree, to some degree.
I think landlords can sort of be seen as the foot soldiers of poverty and homelessness, in the sense that they're there to gatekeep and enforce the laws of the interest of these corporations and the government. And so they don't so they function as a unit that is needed to even have things be like this in the first place. And to me, it's more so they're just given the illusion of power, because at any moment somebody would be an entity, a corporation, any moment could swoop in and take that all from you. You're
Well,
really just not that important is the thing.
well, and you don't see a lot of that here, but in big
Yeah.
cities, I mean, is it Blackstone, right, is one of the
Yeah.
biggest uh, equity firms buying up housing all over the country.
One of their executives was just killed in a shooting in Manhattan in the last week or so. The they some guy went in there, they thought maybe he was there to shoot up the NFL, but they're not sure. And one of the people he killed was because Blackstone is also headquartered where the NFL is in New York, and one of their executives, from what I understand, got killed in that shooting.
I think it's BlackRock, actually.
Was it?
BlackRock. It was Black
Yeah.
something. See, I said
Yeah.
Stone,
Yeah.
Blackstone,
It
BlackRock.
doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
I just
No,
and I
it
just want to
does.
make
So
I
thanks
just
for
want to
the
make one
correction.
more quick comment before, move on. People need to understand that there's a difference between the buzz terms of affordable housing and below market rate rent housing. I think that people oftentimes are not very understanding, because they'll tell you it's below market rate, but depending on where you are, that can mean any kind of thing. And some people will try to tout that as an affordable housing option. But if you below market rate could mean anything. It does not mean actual affordable housing. So you hear the blush term of below market rate rent housing, and all that means it's not as expensive as it would be on the open market. It does not mean it's affordable.
Well, you
Yes,
also
and
when
go ahead.
and also the other problem with stuff like that is what I've seen on just online is when you say that, oh, this below market value rent, whatever, it's oftentimes the reason why that is because it's a horrible place to live. Like I've seen so many where it's like, I want you, 700 something dollars just to stay in a room in my house. And also you have to follow my rules and I get to boss you around like I'm your parents. It's just like, so then you have other stuff like that where it's like, then it really doesn't matter when you consider those factors.
Yeah, true. All right. Well, we are actually going to have a few more programs in the next few
Okay.
months about housing and homelessness, and Housing for Sumka is going to be doing some of its own programming stuff. So,
Yeah.
any last words?
No, just pay attention. That's
Yeah.
all.
Anybody have any questions or comments? All right. So, Zach, we're going to move on so you rabble roused them out of making a decision at Fir Grove on the turf, the news in Roseburg.
Well, I
So what's
didn't
going to
really.
happen?
So, what's happened in the last week? I've been calling people, emailing people, um, making statements and such. This last Monday, the Roseburg City Council was set to vote on the Fir Grove Field plan for Fir Grove Park in Roseburg, which, for those who don't know, it would effectively be removing about half of the grass space on the field at Fir Grove Park and installing plastic turf, importantly, which is fenced and gated off. Um, this has been pushed by the soccer club for the last 5 years and is really being further pushed by city administrators. Umpqua Health Alliance has really backed this project. Um, and so the city council this last Monday was set to vote on it. And a bunch of people showed up in support of the turf. A bunch of people all being associated with um, athletics clubs in the Roseburg area. Almost all of them were associated with Umpqua United Soccer Club, which leases the space at Fir Grove Park for soccer games and practices and all that. And there were a handful of people who were there in opposition to the uh, turf plan. Some who spoke about the space being used for things other than sports, people playing with their dogs and lying on the grass. There were a handful of people who were involved with Roseburg Ultimate Frisbee who were there, and they were, to my understanding, not consulted at all through this process. When I talked to people I knew who were involved with Ultimate Frisbee, it was the first time they had even heard of the turf plan, despite being regular users of the park for many, many years. So several of them showed up and were also kind of intimidated and forgot to even mention that they were part of Ultimate Frisbee. Um, there was a veterinarian who showed up and talked about the issues with sanitizing the field and the spread of disease that uh, could be caused from like animal waste and such, and blood splatters on the field. Um, but there was still virtually no discussion. There was some questioning from a few of the counselors, um, some good questions, but largely what they were being presented with from city administrators was just from the company website of the company that would produce the turf and install it. So there's not really a balanced discussion, and um, even though there was what I can only call a kind of mob that showed up to push for the turf, um, it was very, very clearly a single interest group and was not really reflective of any kind of broader constituency in Roseburg. But there was kind of a backfiring to this. The decision was supposed to be made to move forward with seeking grants to fund this project, which would be something like $3 million initially. That vote ended up getting suspended because so many people showed up in favor of the turf from the soccer club and from the high school athletics department pushing for it. So many people showed up that they pushed the meeting so far into the night that the vote had to be postponed a week. There's a funny irony to that. So for the last week, counselors have had more time to think on it and probably do their reading on it, um, receiving letters and calls, I'm sure. And also in the last week, the soccer club, among others, have been publicizing how great the turf project is going to be. Um, and for the most part, as I've seen it, putting forward straw man arguments. That's my opinion. Uh, so this Monday, tomorrow, by this by the time we're live streaming this. This Monday, the council is holding a special session at 7 p.m. at the Public Safety Center in Roseburg to discuss further and potentially hold the vote on seeking grant funding. The session is going to solely be on turf. From what I heard from a counselor who I called, it's kind of up in the air whether or not public comment is going to be taken again. It could be, but it'll be up to the mayor's discretion, from what I was told. And prior to this, also, the counselors are going to be given a tour, apparently, like a 15-minute tour of the Fir Grove Park, the field at Fir Grove Park at 6 o'clock. And after that, around, I think it was 6:25, they're going to go to Roseburg High School and look at the turf fields there. Why that was determined is a mystery to me. Who decided to do that? It's a mystery to me. Who's going to be giving those tours? Also a mystery to me. But a few things have been brought up by the soccer club this week in defense of the turf plan that they're pushing for. Some things that were said at the meeting last week by soccer club people, I think are really worth like discussing further, but also should be cause for alarm about the nature of this project. Relevant to our earlier conversation in this podcast, one of the reasonings that some people gave as public comments in favor of this turf plan, and especially its inclusion of fencing, was this is meant to keep unhoused neighbors out of the park. There were claims that that the soccer club, members of the soccer club, were having to comb the fields for needles, and that they were concerned about our homeless neighbors wandering onto the field and even stealing bags from people who are using the field. And I can say, as a longtime user of that field, going back to childhood, but also having played there during high school, and historically, bags stolen at the Fir Grove Park, especially while teams are out there, soccer teams and such, those thefts have largely been other kids using the field. Even in the days I played in soccer, right? There were high school kids who would rifle through even their teammates' bags and steal something. And so the demonization of homeless people and leaving it at that, I think, is a real um, reductive way of looking at the situation. Now, of course, that was just one of many things that was brought up, but I find it concerning that uh, that explicit reference to homeless people and really wanting to keep them away from the park um, really goes to show that this project is being thought of with a very exclusivist mindset by most who are defending it. Uh, there have been some other things brought up. We Community Rights put out a statement that also went up on Facebook, and
I saw that.
some response to this as well. One person who's responded to this has done things like put forward a straw man argument, like, there's been no indication that the parks would be privatized or pay to use, which was not something that we actually addressed in our statement. But it is a serious concern. Enclosure of a public space, of a public park that's widely used by people who don't even play sports. Um, it does set a precedent for how a public place can be treated. And down the road, it does lend to the possibility for privatization. It wouldn't be possible without fences, without enclosure. There are claims about the field itself being unplayable, saying that, well, the field is mostly dirt. I can tell you, as somebody who is out there every day, I was out there this morning, it is very grassy. And it's certainly not the most perfect space to play on. It certainly needs a lot of maintenance, but it is playable. It's not some dirt wasteland. And it's an ecosystem on top of that. I mean, just this morning on when I was out at the park, there were Canada geese who were out there nibbling at the grass and insects, and also fertilizing the soil, spreading seed around. Um, it is more than just a sports space, and it's considering the non-human life that also uses it, it goes beyond just our own human community's use. It's tied to the river ecosystem that's next to it. It's tied to the wildlife that use the field as a place to get sustenance, or for squirrels to store nuts in the winter if you want to go there. Um, and there was one other claim that came up about this field, the turfing of the field, being a temporary solution for a permanent problem. Well, the problem with that kind of claim is this is this is putting concrete, really, paving over and putting turf on top of this space. It is a kind of permanent move, and it does limit, say in the future, say it could be 20, 30 years from now. Well, future generations in Roseburg might decide, hey, we want to actually use this space for something like rewilding. Maybe we want to uh, plant some like local flora in some of this space on the Fir field, and maybe it could be used to plant a garden or something. I've seen people make that argument. We could use it for community gardening, potentially. I'm sure that would take a lot of work. But all those kinds of possibilities would be restricted with this move to future generations. They wouldn't even have the choice to use the space for something else with the installation of this turf.
Well, are you going to be there tomorrow night? Is there going to be more people that are going to raise objections? Are people going on the tour? Because I'm assuming you can all go on, everyone can go on the tour as well. If it's going to be part of the decision-making process, it's probably part of that public
Yeah,
meetings
presumably.
requirement.
Presumably, it
Yeah.
was part of the announcement that went around. I'm planning on being there tomorrow night at the Public Safety Center at the very least. Um, I expect a lot of the sports people are going to show up. Um, I would encourage I would encourage anyone in Roseburg who has the capacity to do so to show up here, because it really is an issue that goes beyond just the sports issue, the playability of the field for soccer players and for football, lacrosse players if they want to use it. This is a question of what a public park really is. Is a
Yeah.
public park a space for everybody in the city and beyond? People who come from out of town, I mean, they could use the park if they want to. Um, is a public park for the public, or is the public park really just for a select group of people, being the sports clubs in this case? Those who can afford to pay to participate in club sports or high school sports.
Yeah, that's what I would argue is they're already a private club. So when you say it's not privatized, if it's exclusive use where you have to pay to play, it's already been privatized. And the soccer club is a private group. It's not a public group. It's not run by a public entity. And so one has to become a member of it and all those things in order to use it. And I'm not necessarily against, periodic use, but I am concerned about any exclusive use or anything that's going to actually, like you said, wall off or fence off, the public space. So nobody can use it, but limited groups. That just sounds like lazy public, lousy public policy. Um, well, hopefully folks will show up there, and at least let the city know that I'm assuming that there must have been some when that people were going to oppose it, or I don't know that they would come out in such numbers, right? The soccer club itself.
Yeah, yeah. When caught on, I think that I had said something about it.
All
All it
right.
takes is
Well,
one person to call out, everyone who's in favor of such a plan.
yeah,
But
that's a good example. Right. You're right. I mean, sometimes it does just take one person bringing up the issue. I certainly wouldn't have known about it had you not sent out that email, and I live in the city and, do pay attention, maybe a little bit too
yeah.
narrow on
Well,
what I pay
for
attention
those
to.
two who missed our last conversation about it, I think it really should especially cause alarm because one of our Parks and Rec commissioners resigned over this issue because
Yeah.
the Parks and Rec
Yeah.
Commission was presented with this, a few weeks ago before it went to the city council. And the city staff who were presenting on this had nothing else and kind of steamrolled the meeting. And the vote moved forward, but nobody really had very serious discussion about it. And so one of our commissioners wrote in a letter after the meeting and said, I can't do this anymore because public comments that have come up, letters that have been sent in are not even read. They're not even discussed,
Yeah.
even though they're substantive. And, you know, people like even those members of the commission themselves are not really informed about this. And so they're expected to make decisions without really any discussion or education on the matter. And that is not a way to run a city.
No, and I think you're absolutely right. That's a bigger, more fundamental problem to me as somebody who lives here, is, the city staff does not run the city, and they've been made to believe that they can because of the way they've been allowed to operate. And it's not even the current city manager that started that problem. It certainly started at least with the one before her. And has periodically been a problem on and off. I mean, if the council lets them and the mayor lets them, decide things, they're going to be able to do that. But this is more than, this isn't the first time our city manager has been caught in a questionable behavior in regard to trying to do that. And really, I don't want to, sound elitist, but really needs to know their place as public servants as opposed to thinking that they're actually the ones entitled to rule the
Oh,
city
is it
government.
elitist when you're of the public and you're talking about those ruling officials in
Yeah, I don't think
of
so.
our
Yeah,
city?
yeah, good point. Yeah. So is there anything else on the news other than the only thing I wanted to mention is just, because we've talked about the Umpqua Public Transportation District. There's a thing in the news review. I said the headline that they're going to cut their Saturday or their weekend routes because of funding cuts. So doesn't this, continue to beg the question of what are we paying this 130,000 or whatever it is for this consultant? This political consultant, and there's like three or four staff people total that are getting, close to $100,000 on this public transportation district for Douglas County. And it's really way too small to have that kind of bloated, administration. There's something really wrong with that whole thing to me. And particularly now that you're looking at cutting, routes for people, which is unfortunate because think about it. If you need to use the bus, it's certainly a work thing, but it's also a social thing, right? If you go to places, your opportunity to interact in your community is limited. And for a lot of people that live in the building, like where I live, where there's senior and disabled folks, or actually the three buildings downtown Roseburg have a lot of low income seniors and folks with disabilities living here that often rely upon the bus service for for everything.
Mhm.
So,
There really seems to be a two-pronged attack on transportation in Oregon. One because of the ODOT funding that is, in a serious crisis where people have been fired. At this point, people have lost their jobs. Um, I understand there's some emergency session that the governor called to try and scrape something together. I don't know how fruitful it'll be. But of course, there's the other prong of the federal funding through grants of especially a lot of rural transportation districts. Here in Oregon, that's also complicated by Oregon's status as a sanctuary state, which is not, going to comply with um, federal agencies like ICE, not, allowing the use of public transportation services for schlepping poor immigrants around by ICE agents. And that, of course, is something that the feds are analyzing and are going to use as an excuse to cut funding from even us in rural Oregon, even in communities like very very red ones, very
like
Trumpian,
ours.
where people are not necessarily in agreement with the sanctuary state um, declaration in Oregon. So both of those things are really going to be messing up transportation services in Oregon and for the foreseeable future.
Yeah.
Rock in a hard
Yeah, I
place.
think you're right. Yeah, I think you're right. And I think that the people here who are in support of the federal government are, going to be rudely awakened that they're not going to be saved, you know, in Oregon from the ramifications of retribution by the Trump administration.
Yeah, it really is. I think we have to think of this as a much broader thing beyond just how it's affecting us here too. Like up in Portland, TriMet, which runs the light rail and bus systems and
Mhm.
such, they're seeing cutbacks as a result of these moves. So,
Sure.
we're in that same boat, but because we already have less, we're worse off.
Yeah. So, hey, Kevin, are you still alive out there?
I am in fact still alive. I just had to plug my phone in because it was getting. It's also the hotspot of my household, so it's got a lot of duties and its battery drains very fast.
Oh, you mean it's the internet hotspot?
Yeah, exactly. It's
It's also warm there too, right?
yeah, it's very warm, but it's
Uh,
cold on the
all
coast.
right. So, any last comments from anyone?
I'll just say that Zach sent me that statement for community rights, and that I could send it to I could email it to the mayor and the city councilors, and despite my challenges with the computers and everything, I managed to send them off this morning. It was interesting. I got one response back immediately, and that was from Ellen Porter, and she's the only one that has responded. She was encouraging me that I should contact all of the city councilors, which I did. But
Yeah.
I just found it interesting that she responded immediately.
I think that a lot of them take this advice from, staff people, and sometimes that means lawyers, although they're contracted staff, that try to, listening to lawyers when you're a public servant, elected, or, is really not always the best advice, right? They're always looking at potential liabilities and they don't want you to stick your foot in their mouth.
Yeah.
So they give you bad advice when it comes to politics, in my opinion. And, I've known a lot of lawyers that I really like in my life, but sometimes you have to say no. Just say no to your lawyer because, getting involved in, not weeding out the real political need for, communicating with constituents or anybody who responds, or communicates with you. So I'm glad to hear that Ellen Porter did that. Responded.
Well, before we sign off here soon, which it sounds like we're heading in that direction, we did just get a message, and so for our first devoted fan, I'd like to give a shout out to Joanne Gordon for sending us a message while we're live streaming. And thanks, Joanne. It was about the
Yeah.
turf field, and they really appreciated our commentary on that. And their girlfriend had apparently also liked it. So
I think we're losing your voice. Yeah, and I forgot to thank, Jamie and Octavia before they signed out. So, bad for me. So I thank them for joining us. And are we done?
well, I want to thank everybody.
I can't hear you.
I want to thank everybody for joining us. Yeah, I've got my phone near the charging port, if you can't tell. So we'll see you next time, and
All right,
thank you for
thank
joining
you.
the SOPP.
Yeah.